I got really quite sick. I got diagnosed, it took them a while, but they diagnosed me with a non-Hodgkin's stage 4 lymphoma. And at the time, I was like, okay, I got a great medical team. They're gonna do what they need to do. They figured it out. Here we go. And 9 months into my experimental treatment, I'm coming in to speak to my doctor. They've just run a bunch of tests, see how it's going. And I come in and I sit down with my doctor, and she sort of looks at me and she's like, the news isn't good. These treatments aren't working. And I gotta tell you, you probably have about 6 months, 3 to 6 months to live. And I remember in that moment, it was just like, whoa, that is not, what do you do with that? And so I walked out and started thinking to myself, well, if they don't have an answer, I think of in companies, the vision of corporate brand Susan was like, I'm not buying the 3 to 6 month thing. I'm going elsewhere. So I explored non-traditional medicine, alternative medicine. I went to psychology, I went to spirituality, I would do whatever, diet, nutrition. Now the interesting thing about all these different groups, the medical model at that time did not like alternative medicine. But I'll be clear, the alternative people didn't like the medical model. There was all sorts of problems that went on trying to get these people to talk to each other. So I spent a lot of time navigating, because these, in my opinion, these were the smart people. I was like, you're on Project Susan now, so deal with your differences and talk to each other. For me, what that taught me coming out of it was, when there's been conflict, when there's been pain, when there's been angst, the key isn't to solve it or resolve it sometimes, but to listen and really be willing to say, I don't know what happened to you, but I get what you're telling me I need to pay attention to, because it was painful, it was hard. And if we can't learn to do that in a way that has genuineness, even when somebody's really angry or upset, and they may have good reason, even if we can't agree, we still need to be able to listen. And actually, I think when we do that, something else occurs. There are connections that occur that make something else possible. And we are at a critical time in our world right now to be able to deal, you guys know, you're dealing with diversity, to be able to deal with our differences. Not to necessarily make them all resolved, because I don't know if we're gonna get there, but to at least sit across from each other and be able to have a real conversation. There's lots of stats out there about what engagement means in an organization. And it's relatively poor how engaged a lot of large organizations are. And you can look at all sorts of reasons for that, but we actually think people want to show up at work. They want to be real. They want to be able to say what they need to say and be heard, seen, and even if it's differences. And when that doesn't happen, engagement goes down. So we actually believe not only is conflict something that is a competitive advantage on a team, but it is also fundamental to people's engagement and enjoyment of their work. And when you people, who said you had that icky team, I'm betting you may not have been able to speak up, or things weren't said. We will fight over strategy and how to do something. And if there's not a way to get it to above that, to why are we really all here doing this? And people don't even know that that's what they're doing. Because, I think of that back with my doctors. If I went into my doctor who was a surgeon, they were like, surgery is the way to go. I have what we call the brow,
People are so intimidated by our brow.
And so often if I'm working with people, I have to tell them, this is just me. I have had clients suggest, do some Botox, do some work on that, tell me, and what I spent a lot of my life sort of, kind of figuring out how to keep the world safe. And I actually learned when I was young, if I'm aggressive enough, people will stay away from me. And I don't look it now, but I guess I can look tough. I learned how to do, but and it's funny that I never realized that that's what people were reading. And so it takes, and what they were interpreting. She's always had a much nicer look, but she's way meaner. That's all I'm just telling you. We learned early, like we said, how we're going to cope in a situation where there's tension, ambiguity, uncertainty. And in my opinion, the thing that we do the poorest in our culture in Western culture anyway, is deal with uncertainty. And we usually have learned to deal with it various fashions on how, because it's uncomfortable. And so we all have some form of coping that if we don't recognize is a coping style, then we actually end up doing it all the time without even knowing it. There really is a lot of evidence, even in our own brain, that when conflicting ideas are actually beginning to occur, that is when creativity happens. It doesn't happen when you're in that rote, same thing you always do. But to get you, that's why that discomfort is so important. But you have to allow for the discomfort. And even ask yourself sometimes, like as a there's a highly sensitive person. I am not that. I am the highly reactive person, And so, but it's helped me to really get to, why is this so important to me? Why have I got myself fired up? And if I can really drop underneath that, it's very different when I realize, I'm fighting because of something. It's not what I thought it was. It's usually something else. So either version, get interested in the other person, get interested in why am I so riled up? And one of the biggest challenges I think we have is because we can't just put rules and regulations in place and believe that people are going to have real conversations. You're going to get into conflict because people have different perspectives on it. Is how willing am I to show up vulnerably and be real and say what I need to say, even if somebody's sitting across from me, I'm going to probably say it the wrong way, but can I notice it? And then see, obviously I said something that was offensive. What can I do now? How can I recover? What can I say to be interested in how I made a mistake? Not because the other thing I might do if I'm not vulnerable is say all the things I'm supposed to say. And then you actually, I probably don't, I'm not as interested in you because I'm sitting here trying to make sure I say it right. And then I don't get to see you. So vulnerability to us is very critical to having the type of conversation that gets real. And the second piece is be curious, like how it's so easy to look across and think I know someone because I've heard something about their history, their culture, the way they look or whatever it is. And a lot of times there's a lot more there than that. So can I allow myself to be curious and open to maybe this person is not at all who I think they are. And I've actually most of us are projecting it out into the world anyway. So it just, how can I be curious and engage in asking you more about who you are? When they can be who they are and not have to live one life one place and another life another place. And that goes across a broad spectrum. So the more that people realize the way to get to engagement in the workplace is through actually letting people be their full spectrum of who they are. But most of us are most threatened because we feel I get into uncertainty and I don't know what to do. I may say the wrong thing. I don't know how to solve this problem. I don't know what to do. And when we are in uncertainty, we tend to go to some bizarre place. Like if I can just get control of this situation, it's going to be okay. And sometimes it's really hard to say, I have no control over this situation. And I'm still going to stand here and be with you and talk about it. And we may not come to a solution. We may only come to being able to sit across from each other and say, that sucks. That was painful. That should have never happened. I don't know that I can fix it, but I can listen.